Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at the weekly meta breakdown for Timeless Best of 3 Traditional Timeless. We are going to look at what decks folks are playing in Diamond and Mythic rank and see kind of where the format's evolved in the first couple of weeks of its existence. So typically we would look at a week at a time because the format's fairly new, really like 2-3 weeks old. We're going to look at from about 16 days worth of data, kind of look through there. We're also going to be leveraging, so two kind of data sources. We're looking at Untap GG, what you see on the screen. Companion tool aggregates user win rates, so you can track your own games, and then it combines it with other users, gives some cool stats. Link is in the video description for Untapped if you want to get started. We're also going to leverage MTG decks that have some other decks, so either community decks, like individuals who are doing pretty well with certain archetypes, or just kind of some of the oddities. Like for example, for whatever reason, either people haven't been using a tracker that have been playing a lot of Field of the Dead, for example. So that's a prominent deck that you'll be seeing, the mono green field deck, but we're just not seeing it in the stats just yet. So a bit of noise this early on because the population sizes are a bit lower. So something to just keep in mind as we look through. So we are going to look, if you're looking for best of one data, I put out the video the other day, so you can check it out. We'll have the playlist there so you can pull out the information. We're going to start looking at popularity first in terms of decks, and then we will also look at winningness. As I always mention, a popular deck doesn't necessarily correlate to the most winning deck. Some cases it does, some cases it doesn't, but it is something that we just kind of see because it does help to kind of see what you're most likely to face, because as you're tailoring for a more competitive stage, if you know, like as a hypothetical, creature-based aggro is 50% of the meta, well, you want to have fatal pushes. But if it's control, then you maybe don't want the fatal pushes main if it's such a large proportion of the meta. Well, we haven't seen it here. There have been formats. Still to this day, the funniest was Alchemy Best of 3 was 80% mono black control when Bowmaster was still legal in the format, which was hilarious. So we'll take a look and go from there. So we are looking popularity December 12th through to the 28th, 16 days, Diamond and Mythic. So Rakdos Midrange is 16%. The one thing I will mention, they're still getting their naming conventions correct, and I'll shoot them a message. So we're seeing some things getting flagged as shadow decks when they're not shadows, like Death Shadow necessarily, as well as some things just getting lumped in. So this Rakdos Midrange deck also includes like the Rakdos Breach deck, which is a more appropriate kind of naming convention for it, since it plays different. Like the mid-range deck, you're kind of one-for-oneing. The Breach deck is more of a Storm combo deck that you're playing. Jund mid-range, kind of two flavors with the Luris version and then the Jingantha version that plays Minskimbu, about 13%. Sultai midrange in here. We have 5-color Domain, which I think is more appropriate to be named Domain Zoo, just given that it's the connotation of 5-color Domain, especially from people coming from Standard, is like an Atraxa ramp deck, where this is more of a creature kind of aggro. And then we have Grixis Shadow at 4.5%. So as we kind of get it built out, this is going to accumulate over time. It's actually like quite useful if you haven't seen, as an example. If we go to Standard, we can see like historical from like September, for example, and you can see the big ebbs and flows. So this provides us a good kind of graph in terms of seeing where popularity resides for decks. And you can see like a larger congregation here, but you see the ebbs and flows where like Esper peaks up to 34. You've seen it as low as 4%. So this kind of gives a good trend analysis as we kind of build up more data set for Timeless. So we are going to be looking December 12th through the 28th, like I mentioned, Diamond and Mythic rank, 27,000 best of 3 matches. Now, they do have the filter, so we are going to be looking at the smallest population of matches to flag decks. This will give us an idea to see at least, while I do agree small populations create more noise, there's more variance in terms of, you know, a deck winning or losing a couple games in a smaller population has more of an influence. However, given the format's fairly new, that there's still a discovery, people are trying out different things. And especially because there's a lot of overlap in the sense of you'll get, for example, Jund midrange, and there's like 10 different versions of the deck. While seeing as we break it down into these kind of subsets helps us to kind of see what configurations are working best. Is it best to be on Shadow? Is it best to be on Luris? Is it best to be on Jingantha? I think Minskimbu is like the biggest payoff in that deck, and that card keeps kicking my ass. So That's kind of where I look at it with that. But in any case, I will timestamp these decks, place the deck list, so don't fret. But let's jump into it. And of course, it's giving me a headache now. So Grixis Shadow was at 75.6%, and I don't know why it's kind of acting up, but we have it here, 75.6, 41 games, and we are going to look at this. So this is the Shadow version. So full 4 of Shadows, we have Death Rites, we have Dragon Rage Chandler. Notably with this version, there's no access to green in the mana base through a fetch land, so Death Rite is just going to be using as the drain mode or for mana ramp. If you have 2 copies, you can technically activate it, but no way to kind of tutor it in your mana base. You have a number of removal spells between Fatal Pushes, you have your Unholy Heats, you have your Lightning Bolts, discard package of Inquisition and Thoughtseize, some disruption in Spell Pierce just as a fun of one of. Regiman's in there, 3 Brainstorms, Expressive Iteration, Treasure Cruises Card Advantage, and your Bowmasters. Fairly easy to enable Domain with this deck between like the various fetch lines as well as Mishra's Bauble, DRC, kind of enabled that range there. This is a Lurrus Companion deck, and then if you're looking into the sideboard, you're really just kind of helping your various matchups. So against more aggressive decks, you have Fatal Push, you have counter spells when needed for bigger mana decks. Feed the Swarm is kind of catch-all removal, but it can also deal with any sort of like graveyard hate elements, Rest in Peace, stuff like that. Leyline Binding, anything of that nature. Molten Collapse can often 2-for-1 your opponent. There's a lot of cheap 1 mana. Needles, stuff of that nature. Spreading Seas deals with the field decks. Now, Spreading Seas isn't a great answer, but it's an answer to the field decks. Oftentimes when they are going to be doing Field of the Dead, they're going to tutor it, so there is a chance where they just get the value and then you react, but oftentimes it might be too late. This can disrupt their early turns. It's kind of the best of. Kolaghan's Command, Artifact Hate, discard, recursive kind of elements. I wouldn't mind seeing Pithing Needle on this sideboard, just deals with some of the bigger planeswalkers. And then like in heavy, it's unfortunate because this deck would really like Omnixus the adversary, I think, just in the kind of more controlling matchups like the heavy removal. But you have access to Lurrus, so I think Lurrus is better. Another card that's seen some play in the Rakdos versions is Go Blank. Go Blank provides a lot of utility, just obviously the discard element, but exiling their graveyard can come in a lot of cases to be beneficial. The downside with Lurrus here as well is you can't play Ashiok Dreamrender, the 3-mana Ashiok, which really hoses the field deck, just kind of limiting their fetches and stuff like that. One other card you could maybe consider is Stifle, if you want, just to kind of mess up their fetches and stuff like that. And this is going to give me headaches all day. So we got 4-color Midrange up next, 75%, 40 games. And this is, I want to spend all the rare wild cards and mythics, but good stuff soup. So you are elements of this Grixis deck. So it's Grixis green. You have your Brainstorms, Death Rite helps fix your mana, Lightning Bolts, Spell Pierces Disruption with Unholy Heat, your Regiman. No DRC in this. This one's more of a mid-range focused deck. No Baubles as well. Expressive Iterations, Bowmasters, kind of the core cards. Expressive Iteration, very good at getting around Bowmaster's tax. Full of Okos, 2 Minskin Boo, which kind of takes over games on its own, and a Treasure Cruise. Wouldn't actually hate like a 3-1 split with an Uro here, I think, just to kind of gain you some life. There's no real life gain in this deck outside of Death Rite Shaman. I guess you could technically gain life with the foods, but if you're paying, you know, if you're just plussing Oko and gaining 3 life a turn, you're probably too far behind. You have a number of fetchables with the various fetch lands. You'll notice with the mana base, they have a forest and the island. No access to a mountain, because if they Blood Moon you, you're usually fine. Notably no Beseiju in this deck either, playing with the Spire Bluff Canals, kind of mixed into there. Check out the Companion in this since you're playing bigger on the curve. Fatal Push it as just another cheap removal spell. You have Grafdigger's Cage for any sort of combo ES deck that's trying to cast things from the graveyard for free, so it does hurt like Breach decks. It can mess with Field of the Dead since the Titan searches through Natural Order. Actually, so Natural Order searches for Titan. It doesn't get around the lands, so it says creature cards, and they can't cast spells, but lands can enter the battlefield, so notable there. Pithing Needle for like Planeswalkers, activated abilities, Necropotence, stuff of that nature. some hand hate and Thoughtseize, protection against heavy counterspell decks and heavy removal decks, Terra Sunder, artifact enchantment removal, some mystical disputes as disruption, and a treasure cruise for more card advantage. And you are going to give me a headache all day. So then we go to 5-color Domain Zoo, which is at 72%. Again, these are smaller sample sizes. With the number of games being played, this isn't unlikely to just be one person. Like I know with this particular list, Delmo was playing a lot of it, and he was having a lot of success, so it's not unreasonable that these games are pretty much his. So this is the Domain Zoo deck. You're using like things like Wild Nacatl, Territorial Kavu, Nashiba Brawler, which all benefit from playing domain cards. So you can fetch for the number of dual lands, but you also have Savai Triumph and Zagoth, which provide 3 pips. Tribal Flames is another payoff, dealing 5 damage for 2 mana. You have Lightning Bolts, Regavans, Stubborn Denial, which I'm not a huge fan of, but usually sees play in these decks. Gets played in the modern version, but you also have the Scion, the 12 mana cost reduction one, which gives you another 4/4. 3 Once Upon a Times to find you some of your cards, free cast in the first kind of spell. Some Bowmasters tucked in there. I do like the inclusion of Minsk as opposed to just the full 3 Okos, and then Leyline Binding's another 1 mana removal spell. Another Jingantha Companion. Jingantha is really well positioned right now. A lot of decks are playing like Fatal Push or Bolt, and neither deal with Jingantha, which is nice, so a lot of times it can just solo. This also helps get around Blood Moon at times, where you can use the mana it casts to get around it, and it can be cast through a Blood Moon. Same idea, Cages, Veils, the extra Bowmasters for the heavy draw decks. For bigger mana decks, you have like Reprieve in there to kind of tempo them. Really good against like Natural Order, where they have to sacrifice as an additional cost, and then you return it to their hand, so they just lose their creature. Artifact Enchantment Hate, Graveyard Hate, Small Things Hate, as well as Graveyard Hate. This card like solos Phoenix at times, depending on how far along they are. And then Klothys is really a really good sticky threat. Tough to deal with in a lot of cases, eats away at their graveyard, offsets your life. Good against control, good against graveyard strategies. Finally, 70.8 for Jund Midrange, and this is the non-Lurrus version. So there is a Lurrus version going around, very kind of similar idea. I actually like this version better, just because I really think Minsk and Boo is a really good card in this format, and every time it casts against me, it's either must answer or it just kills me like right away. So you have your Death Rites, Fatal Push, 7 discard spells main, which is nice. You're doing 2 Unholy Heat, notably no Lightning Bolt, which is an interesting inclusion. Might be because of budget reasons, but they do have a Bolt to the side. They do have like a number of other rares and mythics, but that's an interesting inclusion there of no bolts. Bolts has the flexibility to go face, but Unholy Heat's a more scalable card. Single copy of Croxa to reanimate. You have your Molten Collapse, again, just flexible removal. Orcish Bowmasters, Tarmogoyf. We're boomering, not zoomering. Goyf gets pretty big in this deck. Fable, I really like because you can get rid of like your Inquisition's Thoughtseize late game. Trespasser often requires like it's a 2-for-1. If your opponent wants to remove it, gains you some life, eats away at their graveyard, and then your Minsk and Boo top end. I've seen some versions of this deck play Jarsoul in this slot to rebuy your cheap cards. I've also seen some decks mainboard Klothys, which is a pain for some decks to deal with, just kind of offsetting the life total as well. Seiju here, Hive in here, enough of the mana sources that you can reliably also run Blood Moon in the side. Jingantha the Companion, so just cheap removal. We got Lightning Bolts, we got Grafdigger's Cage, Needle. The Demonic Tutor in the sideboard's a little interesting. You'd feel like you'd either want it in the main or not play it at all. I'd probably just swap this to something else, to be honest. Just more interaction or just something different. I don't see why you would tutor in a sideboard. Why you'd sideboard in a tutor if you just want a main board. I can see it in the main board as a one-off in these decks because you can have Silver Bullet style effects if you need a discard spell or whatever it may be, but let me know what your thoughts are there. Molten Collapse, again, just Molten Impact. It's 2-for-1. You got Blood Moon against the greedy mana-based decks. You can fetch proactively. Go Blank for Hand Hate and Exile. Hitazuku, and then just like some catch-all. Maelstrom Pulse is pretty sweet in the format. Then go to Sultai Midrange, and you're just going to give me a hassle with everything. Sultai's at 71. I was messing with all the filters, so I think that messed me up. So I think this one is Croaky's list, so 70%. So the one thing I find with this deck, it lacks a little bit of early interaction, so your opponent can get under you, but you're using Deathrite Shamans, Halflings to kind of ramp up into Okos or Uros. You have Brainstorms, Stern Scolding's a nice one-man answer to like Bowmaster, some discard, Fatal Pushes. You do have your Baubles in here. Tutor helps you find key cards, a one of Once Upon a Time, Treasure Cruise. So this one's almost more a little bit Sultai control-y, as opposed to some of the mid-range decks that are a little bit more creature dense, but you're really just kind of one-for-one-ing your opponent, discarding, and then hoping that your payoff bombs or like card advantage kind of outgrinds you from that matchup. Jingantha is in here. Again, a lot of the same kind of hate pieces. Dampening Spear is one that we haven't seen. This is very good against the Rakdos Storm decks, just to kind of punish them there. And this is incidentally okay against field because, so Castle Garenbrig makes the green mana and it taps for 2 or more mana, so it would produce colorless instead. So it does kind of mess up their ramp ability there, which is kind of interesting. Edicts, Tail Ends for interesting kind of effect there. Stifle / counter legendaries, and then some graveyard hate, and Boseiju for artifact enchantment hate. We've seen Terra Sunder as another alternative here. Then Rakdos Storm. I apologize for, is this the Storm or the Burn? This is Rakdos Burn. I don't know why it's being like this today, and I have everything open, so I don't want to reset everything. So the Burn deck was at 69%. Nice. Again, this deck, I played it in best of 1. I found 16 lines too few, but it's putting up results. This version is really trying to punish these greedier mana-based style decks that we see a lot of in the format. It's not unusual to be, you know, Fetch, Shock, Thoughtseize you. I'm at 15. So you have like the DRC, Bauble, kind of Ragavan package. Swift Spear gets the boost from Bauble as well. You have cheap Burn and Lightning Bolt, Play with Fire, Skewer the Critics, Bump of the Night deals 3 for 1 mana. Akiba comes in here, pings. Nice thing with Akiba over Kumano is Akiba pings twice, and on the second turn it pings on your upkeep, so you're able to like turn 1 this, turn 2 light up the stage or skewer if needed, whereas Kumano only does it the turn it comes down, so it's harder to enable the spectacle. Eidolon is a Punisher effect, Bowmaster's in there as well, some utility lands, Mount Doom, can ping, Den in there, some Ramanat Ruins, bunch of different ping style effects. I would say like there's 2 fetches here, there's some basic mountains. I would probably not play Sulphur Springs and just play the Blood Crypt because you're an Eidolon deck. Like there's a lot of painful mana based, like Mount Doom deals damage to you, Ramanat deals damage to you, Sulphur Spring deals damage to you, while Blood Crypt will deal 2 damage up front. It's not like recurring damage, and you are kind of mana intensive in the sense that like there's color requirements. It's not like you're playing 3 in a red that you can just play colorless. Lurrus Companion, you got Cages, you got Go for the Throats, Molten Collapse, Whirling Vortex, really nice against life gain or kind of the grindier against like Necropotence, stuff like that. Searing Blood for the creature matchups, it's both creature removal and a Lightning Bolt staple to 1. 4-color control. Let's head over. So 4-color control is at 68.6. It's 4-color Omnath. So you have in here Brainstorms, you have Delighted Halflings to ramp you. I was playing like Dragon or Deathrite Shaman, but I was on a Yorion pile. This version's a lower curve with Jingantha. Swords to Plowshare, Lightning Bolts, you have Expressive Iteration for card advantage, Okos and Teferis in here. You have Minskin Boo, so just a lot of powerful threats, money pile kind of deck. Omnath gains you a bunch of life. Ramps you, Leyline Binding is another cheap removal spell, so a lot of cheap effects here. When I was playing this deck, again, like I was playing a Yorion version, so you got a little bit more space for things. I did like, after playing the deck, I could see it playing Dig Through Time. Just another cheap card advantage engine. The one thing with Expressive Iteration in this deck is, while you do have a number of cheap spells, you also have a lot of 3s and 4s, so it's sometimes hard to play both of them that turn. So that's the only consideration. This deck's also, like with Yorion, you're able to play like 30, I think it was on 33 lands, so I did have a couple Field of the Deads in there. increases the number of fetches, the number of kind of duels. 23 lands is a little low, I think, for this type of deck. Like in a non-fetch format, you're probably playing 26, 27 lands I could see for this type of curve, but interesting to kind of see there. Jangantha Companion, Alpine Moon for the field decks, or just kind of any utility land decks, but predominantly field. Counter, anti-counter, anti-black removal, graveyard hate counters, and then Boseiju for artifact enchantments. Really clean mana base. Recipes are actually really well positioned right now. Alpine Moon's a cool consideration actually for these red decks that I could see more of like the burn decks and stuff playing, because it's a cheap card, so it fits into the decks and it shuts off those other decks. Then go to Mono Black Necro, 66.7. So this deck is looking to Dark Ritual into Necropotence on turn 1 ideally. And then that draws you a whole bunch of cards. You gain life with Shieldred. One Ring draws you more cards. Beseech can help you tutor. Luris can rebuy like your baubles, get you some value there. Can also rebuy your Bowmasters. Graveyard Trespasser, some graveyard hate, life gain like we mentioned. Demonic Tutor helps you find some key cards too. And then kind of the big thing, you're going to lose a lot of life in this deck, but you could draw, say, 7, and then you pitch all those cards to March of Wretched Sorrow and gain a whole bunch of life back, which is kind of cool utility. Field of the Ruin in here, Swamp, stuff like that. So this version here is on the Blood Moon in the sideboard. Now, notably, the only way to cast this Blood Moon is actually off of Beseech the Mirror Tutor. I think it's right to potentially reconfigure to either play a basic mountain, or likely not a basic mountain, just play a couple fetches and play a Blood Crypt. So that kind of increases the likelihood that you find those cards, because you're only playing a 2 of Beseech, and if you draw this into your hand, then you're kind of screwed. Like, you're not really casting it. This deck doesn't make treasures, where decks in the past you could see treasures. So that's just kind of my thought there. But Graveyard Hate with Leyline of the Void, Sweeper and Meathook, Feed the Swarm for enchantment removal, Bitter Triumph for planeswalker removal or creature, activated abilities, and more hand hate with Duress. Kind of mixed into there. So Rakdos Breach Storm, if we go down, this is being classified as Rakdos Midrange, is at 66.7. So this deck here, it is a combo-oriented deck. So what you're trying to do is self-mill with like Stitcher Supplier, DRC, putting stuff into your graveyard. You have like Diabolic Intent and Demonic Tutors. So basically you're going to fill your graveyard. You cast Underworld Breach, and ideally you have a Dragon Rage Chandler out. So what you're able to do is cast Dark Rituals, gain a whole bunch of mana, kind of keep surveilling into your graveyard to fill the graveyard. Same with like Stitcher Supplier to put stuff in. You Diabolic Intent your creatures, and then you find your Tendrils of Agony and win that way there. Kind of storm out in that respect. Your Luris Companion, you have Tormod's Crypts in here, you have Deathrite Shamans that could come in over the Regavans and the Grindier matchups. Unholy Heats, Feed the Swarm for like Graveyard Hate that matters, like Rest in Peace, Leyline of the Void, stuff like that. Grape Shot as just an additional storm card if they ego your Tendrils of Agony. Molten Collapse deals with the cheap artifacts. This version's on full 4 Necropotence on the side to shift if they're bringing in a lot of graveyard hate. You can take out Luris and then just Dark Ritual Necro and then play a different type of storm deck in that regard. You then go to Izzet Phoenix at 56%. So this deck here is kind of sweet Phoenix. Like, we got all the powerful cards. You're basically just trying to like loot cards into your graveyard, Faithless Looting, a lot of cheap cantrips, a lot of cheap removal. You have Lightning Bolt and Unholy Heat. Shredder puts stuff in the graveyard. Dragon Rage Chandler puts stuff in the graveyard. Cast 3 instants or sorceries. Get back art like Phoenix. And then you have your Treasure Cruises. A lot of fetches to help enable Brainstorm. Fuel the Treasure Cruise kind of elements of it. Jangantha Companion. Graveyard Hate. Counter Hate. Artifact Hate. And removal. More Shredders when they bring in kind of Graveyard Hate. Also nice to just kind of fly over the top. And then Blood Moon for the greedier mana bases, field decks, stuff of that nature. And then 3 other decks I wanted to feature. So we've spoken a lot of the field deck. For whatever reason, it didn't come up in the stats. All MTG or Althorex, very good player. Got fairly high up on the ladder with this natural order version. So Boreal Grazers and Kami help early to ramp you. And then you have Fierce Empath that can also find you any of your big cards that help. Primeval Titan being the key one. Generosent is kind of cool because they'll find you a land, but you can also just natural order into it or late game cast it. Once Upon a Time to find you key cards like lands. Sylvan Scrying, same idea. But basically, these cheap ones, you can then turn 3 natural order and get ahead by finding like your Titan or whatever it may be. You have Titan of Industry, which can blow up like Blood Moons and stuff like that. Split Unking makes your lands come into play untapped. You'll notice a number of various lands, but Castle Garenbrig lets you ramp out with only 5 lands. A Titan, Graveyard Hate, like a creature. Kalani Garden also makes a creature that can be natural ordered. Life Gain, kind of removal. So with Hammer, Battlements, and Stomping Ground, you can give your Titan haste the same turn. Sunken Citadel is cool because it adds 2 mana. And then that's for activated abilities, so this can reduce the cost of Castle Garenbrig. It can reduce the cost of Hammer Battlement. Actually, it can't because you're not really going to meld this one, but theoretically. Blast Zones, kind of those elements. You also have, where is it? Cavern of Souls as a way to make your Titans unblockable. Tranquil Fullback, Artifact Enchantment Hate. Notably, just blowing up Blood Moon is a big thing, but Graveyard Hate as well. Thrun for heavy counterspell matchups, heavy removal. Carnage Tyrant, similar idea. Crater Hoof for the mirror. Stonebrain for combo. Deafening Silence for Storm. And Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. There's a, where'd you go? Windswept, or Temple Garden. That gets you your white mana. We then go to a cool one. This one went 17-2 in Mythic. This is Overcooked, Rakdos Overcooked. So Regavans, Ornithopters, and Bowmasters. You have the Retrofitter Foundry package with Ornithopter in here. Makes you a bunch of 4/4s. Brass Tunnel Grinder kind of loots, and then if you descend, which is fairly easy, and then it basically is just every time it flips to the line where anytime you cast a spell, you get to discover. So free value. Deadly Dispute for card advantage. Lightning Bolts, Edicts, Fatal Push, a whole bunch of removal options. But the big card is Overcooked in this deck. So players can't gain life. At the beginning of your end step, if you create a food token, if 2 or more non-land permanents enter the battlefield under your control this turn, then you conjure a card named Food Fight to the battlefield. So Food Fight's 2 mana, sack an artifact. It deals X+1 for each name of, like, each copy of Food Fight you control. So you just start throwing food at your opponent. Blood Moon's in here. Yotai is another sweet, like, Mixothopter, which fuels the Retrofitter, and then it's removal, and then it's an animation effect. So you kind of got that. Omnixus on the side, Hand Hate, Molten Collapse, Edicts, Extract the Truth as discard and enchantment kind of hate. Anger of the Gods as a sweeper, Shrapnel Blast to deal 5, and then a License Hearst as graveyard hate. And then finally, we have Jund Sneak Attack. This one was from Sleeping Pill. They went 18 and 8. So this one here, you have like Death Rites, Delighted Halfling, Bowmaster, Fable, Jarsel, and then your top end is Atraxa and World Spineworm. And what you're trying to do is either natural order or sneak attack out these big creatures. So if they're in your hand, you can sneak attack them. They come into play, gain haste, sack them at the end of turn, but Atraxa refills your hand, and then World Spineworm leaves 3 5/5s behind, which is pretty sweet. You can also like Fable, copy the World Spineworm, which is cool. And then Natural Order pulls it from your deck. You have once to kind of find cards. Demonic Tutor, same idea. So trying to find your enchantments. Abundant Harvest can also early game find you lands, late game find you gas. Sideboard, just Needles, Veils, Assassin Trophy is catch-all removal. You got some Blood Moons in the deck. Minskin Boo, Sundering Titan, blow up lands, which is kind of sweet. And then some Boseijus as well. So that's it. Let me know what you think, what you've been playing, what you enjoy. We'll be back with more next week. Thanks for watching.